Hey, this is Chris Garlock from Labor History Today. We're proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network, more than 200 labor radio and podcast shows across the country and around the world. The Labor Radio Podcast Network, where the people speak. Find us at laborradionetwork.org.
Unions rally against Trump practically every day this week. VW workers in New Jersey say it's their turn, and
Surprise, surprise, surprise!
Trump puts an anti-union advocate in the Department of Labor. I'm Harold Phillips, and this is Labor Week for March 8th, 2025, powered by the Labor Radio Podcast Network.
Come on, you toilers that work for wages. Come from every land, trying to fight and band. In one union, ran them for the workers. We'll make upon this earth a paradise when their slaves get wise and organized.
Welcome to another episode of Labor Week, featuring a roundup of the top worker and organized labor stories from the past week. You'll find links to the articles I mention at laborweek.org. Just look up this episode in the episodes section. There's so much going on these days, it's hard to keep track of everything. Trust me, even I have a hard time with it. If you find my weekly roundup useful and you want to make sure Labor Week posts new episodes every week, please subscribe to the show at patreon.com/LaborWeekPod. As the AFL-CIO said on social media recently, America's unions are in the streets, in the courtroom, and the halls of government, fighting for working people everywhere. This week saw a number of actions against the Trump administration and unelected billionaire Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Monday saw unions, federal retirees, and former government workers gathered at sites around the Washington, D.C. region to rally against cuts to the federal workforce. WTOP reports that people gathered at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration headquarters in Silver Spring, Maryland, at the headquarters for the Department of Interior, and Washington, D.C.'s McPherson Square metro station, among other places. Then, on Tuesday, educators, students, parents, and community allies participated in more than 2,000 events and social media actions throughout the country as part of the American Federation of Teachers' Protect Our Kids Day of Action against Trump and Musk's attacks on public schools. That same day, the American Federation of Government Employees, or AFGE, led a rally outside the headquarters of the Office of Personnel Management. WTOP reports AFGE said the hour-long protest was an event to evict DOGE from OPM. On Wednesday, March 5th, the AFL-CIO led a rally outside the E. Barrett Prettyman Courthouse in Washington, D.C. in support of fired National Labor Relations Board member Gwen Wilcox. Judge Beryl A. Howell sided with the working people and union leaders outside his courthouse, releasing a ruling the next day that Trump's abrupt firing of Wilcox was illegal, and ordering that she be reinstated. The Guardian reports that Howell wrote in his decision that the framers of the Constitution, quote, made clear that no one in our system of government was meant to be a king, the president included, unquote. Wilcox, for her part, says she's ready to get back to work. Wednesday saw even more protests when a large crowd of federal employees and union leaders gathered just steps away from the U.S. Capitol. WTOP reports, again, I'm really leaning into their stuff this show, that the protest was organized by a coalition of unions, including the National Treasury Employees Union, and those who spoke criticized the Trump administration's downsizing of the federal workforce. Even with all these voices raised against him, Trump's war on workers and organized labor continues. On Monday, Dave Jamieson broke the news in the Huffington Post that the administration plans to put Elizabeth Messenger, who served as the CEO of the anti-union group Americans for Fair Treatment, in charge of the Labor Department's office that oversees financial disclosures by unions and union-busting consultants. Jameson noted in his article that Messenger's background suggests the administration may ramp up oversight of unions while shifting away from enforcement against so-called persuaders who campaign against unions. Labor Lab's Bob Funk is quoted several times in Jameson's article. If you aren't aware of the good work Labor Lab is doing to expose the union-busting industry in America, you should really do yourself a favor and visit laborlab.us. The Trump administration took direct aim at organized labor on Friday when his Department of Homeland Security announced it's ending the collective bargaining agreement with tens of thousands of frontline employees at the Transportation Security Administration. The AP reports that in a statement announcing the termination, the department said poor performers were being allowed to stay on the job and that the agreement was hindering the ability of the organization to safeguard our transportation systems and keep Americans safe. AFGE called the elimination of the TSA Officers Union clear retaliation. In a statement, AFGE President Everett Kelly said, quote, "They gave as a justification a completely fabricated claim about union officials, making clear this action has nothing to do with efficiency, safety, or homeland security. This is merely a pretext for attacking the rights of regular working Americans across the country because they happen to belong to a union." End quote. The administration took another action against organized labor on Friday with the announcement that the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service will no longer assist with card check, which allows employers to recognize and negotiate with a union once a majority of employees sign up. Josh Edelstein writes in Bloomberg that card check is an alternative to secret ballot elections, which often come with contentious campaigning and allegations of anti-union coercion or retaliation, followed by legal appeals by the losing side. Let's take a look at that again, folks. Card check, a majority of workers sign cards, and they have their union and can start negotiating. Secret ballot election. You have a period during which there's a campaign and the boss can union bust and bring in those union busting consultants that we talked about before. The persuaders. Not hard to imagine which one the bosses are more interested in, Even with all these attacks, labor is continuing to push in the legislative arena. Wednesday saw Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders and Virginia Representative Bobby Scott reintroduce the Richard L. Trumka Protecting the Right to Organize Act in Congress. As Alexis Sterling writes in Nation of Change, the PRO Act seeks to overhaul outdated labor laws that have allowed companies to undermine unions and silence organizing efforts for decades. The legislation would impose financial penalties on companies that violate labor laws, prohibit mandatory anti-union meetings, and ensure that striking workers can't be permanently replaced, among other things. It would also make it easier for new unions to secure their first contracts, ensuring that corporations can't drag out negotiations to weaken organizing efforts. Of course, Republican control of both houses of Congress makes the passage of the PRO Act questionable, at best. But as AFL-CIO President Liz Shuler said in a statement, quote, "We know it won't be easy, but the labor movement never backs down from a righteous fight. And in today's economy, where our workers' hard-earned paychecks are covering less of what they need to, while still facing unsafe conditions and a lack of respect on the job, there's no fight more righteous than ensuring that every single worker who wants a union has a fair shot to join or form one." End quote. Unions are also active in their state legislatures. Just ask the unions in Utah, who this week announced they're going to run a ballot referendum to repeal Utah's anti-public union bill that Governor Spencer Cox signed into law last month. The Salt Lake Tribune reports that the unions have an uphill battle, as Utah has the toughest referendum process in the U.S., requiring supporters to gather 140,000 signatures in 15 of the state's 29 counties. But remember that quote I just read from Liz Shuler? The labor movement never backs down from a righteous fight. My money's on the working people of Utah. Montana legislators learned that working people don't back down the hard way when they tried to move a right to work for less bill out of committee and failed. Twice. The Montana Free Press reports that last Friday, labor advocates flanked the path from the Montana Capitol's rotunda to the state Senate's Business, Labor, and Economic Affairs Committee's hearing on Senate Bill 376, where more than 200 people had signed up to speak against the bill. The bill was voted down in committee the following day, and an attempt to blast the bill out of committee and onto the full Senate floor met a similar fate. Never believe them when they tell you standing up and standing together for what's right won't make a difference, folks. Unions are even taking their fight to co-op board elections. I'm talking, of course, about the election of new board members to the REI Board of Directors. As Cascade PBS reports, unionized REI employees are calling on members of the outdoor retail co-op to vote no in this year's Board of Director elections after the company excluded 2 union-backed candidates from the ballot. REI members can nominate themselves to run for a board seat, but the existing board has the final say over who gets on the ballot. Teferi Gebre and Shimona Moreno nominated themselves and ran social media campaigns, but when the board released its approved list of candidates for 3 open positions on Monday, Gebre and Moreno's names were conspicuously absent. REI members have until midnight on May 1st to cast ballots in this year's election. They can choose to either write for or withhold. The chain's unionized employees are asking members to select withhold on all approved candidates. Workers at REI are still trying to bargain their first contract after unionizing. Workers at Barnes & Noble in New York have been at it for nearly 2 years. And this week they announced those contracts haven't just been bargained, they've been ratified by the membership. AMNY reports the contracts include provisions like a significant wage increase, access to health care, and safety equipment such as back braces and anti-slip mats, a safety committee, and new measures to ensure workers can step away from dangerous situations without fear of reprisal. In a statement on the new contracts, Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union President Stuart Applebaum said, quote, "A union is the only way to ensure workplace protections are secure, especially now when laws protecting workers are under attack. This shows fair contracts can be reached in a reasonable time. If only REI could take a page out of Barnes & Noble's book, more retail workers could have the protection of a union contract with RWDSU at a time when it's needed now more than ever." End quote. Another group of workers who ratified a game-changing contract this week are workers at Tennessee's Ultium Cells facility, who unionized with the United Auto Workers last year. The Detroit Free Press reports the deal's highlights include a one-time $3,000 lump sum payment and wages that align with what Ultium workers make at the company's first plant to unionize in Northeast Ohio. The wages currently start at $26.91 and increase every year to reach $35 per hour by September 2027. See what joining a union gets you, folks? Not just a pay raise, which is nothing to sneer at. You realize that's almost $10 over 2 years. But things like making sure safety is prioritized, and most importantly, a seat at the table when decisions are being made at the executive level. Stuart Applebaum is right. REI should really take a page out of Barnes & Noble and Ultium Cells' book. Someone else who got that message? Volkswagen workers in Cranberry, New Jersey. The United Auto Workers announced this week that VW workers at the Cranberry Distribution Center have reached supermajority support and just became the first VW workers on the East Coast to file to unionize with the UAW. They'll join more than 4,000 Volkswagen workers in Chattanooga, Tennessee, who won their union nearly a year ago. The New Jersey facility is now VW's second in the country to organize with the UAW in the past 12 months. As People's World reports, the New Jersey workers, who distribute aftermarket parts nationwide, are demanding fair pay, affordable benefits, and a secure retirement. Sergio Sumano Jr., a warehouse worker with 7 years at the facility, put it plainly, quote, "We saw what was going on at the Big Three, and then Volkswagen workers in Tennessee won their union. Now it's our turn. If Volkswagen wants to operate in America, they need to treat us with the same dignity as their workers overseas." End quote. Now let's take a look at some of the stories we're going to want to keep an eye on in the coming weeks. Working people are continuing to stand up to the Trump administration's plans to take over the U.S. Postal Service, and postal unions are planning days of action in the week ahead. The American Postal Workers Union has announced that it will hold a day of action on March 20th, and the National Association of Letter Carriers is planning multiple rallies to say hell no to dismantling the Postal Service at branches across the country on March 23rd. And if you're a commuter in California's Santa Clara Valley, you might need to look for another way to get to work on Monday. NBC Bay Area reports that Amalgamated Transit Union Local 265 gave Valley Transportation Authority leaders notice at their last meeting that the union's more than 1,500 light rail operators, dispatchers, bus drivers, and other transit workers plan to strike, picket, and engage in other activities starting on March 10th, after failing to reach a new contract agreement. Might be a good time to think about working from home, Bay Area residents. Before we go, let's take a look at some of the events in labor history that occurred in the past week. On March 3, 1931, the U.S. Congress passed the Davis-Bacon Act, which requires that any new construction, repair of a public building, or public works project that includes federal funding must pay a prevailing wage. The act establishing the Department of Labor was signed on March 4, 1913 by President William Howard Taft. And on March 4, 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt named Frances Perkins his Secretary of Labor, the first woman to hold a U.S. cabinet position. And that's Labor Week for March 8, 2025. Was there a story missing from my top labor news roundup? Let me know at news@laborweek.org. Follow Labor Week on Blue Sky, Facebook, and Twitter at Labor Week for the latest updates throughout the week. Want to make sure you can hear Labor Week every week? Support us on Patreon at patreon.com/LaborWeekPod. As always, you'll find links to the articles mentioned in this episode of Labor Week at laborweek.org. Just look up the episodes in the episodes list. Labor Week is produced and edited by me, Harold Phillips, under a SAG-AFTRA Micropod Agreement. We're a proud member of the Labor Radio Podcast Network. Find more labor radio shows and podcasts, and more about the network, at laborradionetwork.org. Our music is from Batitudes, Joe Hill Punk Exposure. Find out more about Batitudes at facebook.com/Batitudes. And remember what Frances Perkins said. The people are what matter to government, and a government should aim to give all the people under its jurisdiction the best possible life. Hear that, Donnie and Elon? Keep standing up and keep standing together, brothers, sisters, and siblings. I'll see you soon.